Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Talent Finders would like to welcome award-winning creator, director, and entrepreneur Shannon Kring. So, welcome, Shannon.
Thank you so much.
So, Shannon, I would like to congratulate you on all your achievements. Can you share with us how your career as a producer and director started?
My career actually started in perhaps an unusual way. I started out as a restaurant and public relations consultant and ended up in food television. I did that for 10 years, owned my own restaurants and cooking schools and all sorts of things, which we might talk about later. And then just got into documentary production. I wanted to do that my whole life. In fact, as a child, I would play 60 Minutes and always be interviewing everyone and my stuffed animals, etc. So it was always a dream I had.
Amazing. You're also a humanitarian and the voice of the world's forbidden and forgotten. So, can you share with us more about this and where your passion for humanitarian causes started?
The thing that I'm most interested in documenting is human rights violations. And unfortunately, that happens all around the world, as it has for hundreds of years, if not thousands. And so I end up in a lot of so called third world countries where the horrible atrocities that are committed against indigenous people, for instance, are just allowed and are either not publicized at all or just not brought to justice. And so for me, I really enjoy shining a light on these topics that really need to start getting some traction in the mainstream media.
Wow. So, what have been some of the toughest scenarios or people that you've had to interview or the projects you've gotten involved with?
Oh, that is a great question. I spent years documenting horrible human rights abuses in Latin America and witnessed several murders, many actually, more than I can count. Young people who were protesting, getting shot in the head, their head just gone all of a sudden. My camera people being targeted by death squads. Most recently at Standing Rock in the US here, seeing what happened to the Lakota and other First Nations people here, being attacked by law enforcement, by the very government that should be protecting these exact same citizens. And so I'm often in very dangerous scenarios, which luckily, I don't even notice when I'm in the moment. I'm just so focused on getting the story out there that it's only later that I think, wow, maybe that wasn't so wise that I was
Yeah,
standing right there.
for sure. So, your work's been presented by dozens of governments and institutions such as the UN Permanent Forum and Indigenous Issues. How did this come about, and can you share with us more about it?
Well, the people that I document have, through years of systematic racial, economic, gender, geographic, religious, and other types of oppression, they've been left vulnerable and voiceless. And these people know their stories. They've endured it for, centuries. And so they don't need to hear their story. The people who need to hear the stories are the people who largely look like me, who are the ones who come from a lineage that have been doing the oppression. And so I think it's really important that these stories get out into the mainstream and into westernized society because, as I said, the people that I'm documenting, they know their story, but the rest of the people are either in denial or completely unaware of what's happening. And so going to places like the UN Permanent Forum, the Smithsonian, all over at universities, etc., it's so crucial in order to open up a dialogue because if there's no sort of truth coming forward, there can be no reconciliation between the white man and the indigenous peoples of this world. And I would love to see that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so critical, especially with everything else that's been amplified at the moment.
Absolutely. 2020 really shined a light on this. And I think that it's opening people's eyes. And yes, it's very hard to see this type of content and to hear the grief and the outrage. But if we don't do that, how are we ever going to overcome it?
Exactly. And the other question I have around that is, do you think that COVID has amplified it or accelerated it?
Yeah, I do think so. I think that last year really gave a lot of people a lot of time to think,
Yes.
to look at their life. What is their life work balance? What is the harmony or disharmony like in their home? What would they like their legacy to be? You know, as people around us are sick or passing away, it naturally makes us look at our own mortality and ask, how would I like to live the rest of my life? Because we don't know how long we have here. And I really think these types of questions helped. We also got to see the gross disparity between different types of people. You know, the healthcare in the native lands here in the US is absolutely atrocious. The failures in the health system, which is something in my latest documentary that I highlight. And, you know, we just really need to take a look at these things and get working on solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So while you went on a $300 line, you created a culinary eye consisting of a national Emmy award-winning food documentary series, which is an incredible achievement. So can you share with us more about the process and what this was like? How did this opportunity come about?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I did it on a $300 line of credit. I had just graduated college and got an Amex small business card with $300 on it and thought, wow, I should set up my own company. So it actually worked. I wanted to do public relations and hospitality consulting because special events are run through hotel groups, and I was really interested in learning more about the culinary field because I had struggled with eating disorders for most of my life, and I really wanted to overcome that. And I thought, well, that would be a good way to overcome it, to actually work in that industry.
Yes.
And so I started consulting for restaurants and hotels and other hospitality businesses all over the world. I actually worked in 30 some states, and I don't even know how many countries, more than 40, I think it was, opening people's restaurants or hotels or spas, coffee shops, you name it. I worked with a lot of leading brands, and eventually I thought I should own my own culinary schools and restaurants and culinary tour companies, and wow, I should do TV and write cookbooks, and how about if we had our own product line on QVC and this sort of thing. And I think in addition to just being really ambitious, back then I didn't doubt myself. I thought I was capable of anything, you know, the naivety of youth. But then again, because I believed, others believed in me, and I was given some amazing opportunities to see the world. And that's led me to where I am today. So I'm really grateful for the opportunities.
That's amazing. What would you say have been some of your biggest lessons within your career?
Well, I think to do the right thing. It sounds really simple, but
Yeah.
especially when you're young and in business, you're really looking to get ahead. And I probably wasn't as conscious as, well, I definitely wasn't as conscious as I am today about looking at the impact down the road of what I'm doing today. And so I would jump on opportunities much more readily. I trusted everyone in the beginning, which proved to be really unwise. I was one of those unfortunate people who was taken advantage of by my attorney, by the person who was handling my investments, and so on. And so, yeah, I guess being a little bit, using a little bit more restraint, and just treating people how you would like to be treated. I know that sounds very cliche, but we talk about it in people's personal lives, but we really don't focus on that enough in business. And I know that the way that we regard those in our lives, no matter what role they have in our lives, it really does matter. And, you know, I've been around a long time now, many years in the business world, and people talk, and if you've treated people right, that follows you, and if you don't treat people right, that follows you, especially nowadays with social media.
Absolutely. So, after a decade of being in the public eye, you left to document Indigenous elders and global change makers in more than 70 countries. Your niche documentation into typically fiercely guarded groups enabled you to lift the veil. So, can you share with us more about that?
Yes, I was really honored. I still am honored every time I'm welcomed into a community that typically doesn't let people in and doesn't let, don't let cameras around or microcassette recorders or that sort of thing. I moved to Honduras, right on the Honduras-Guatemala border, back when I left behind the culinary world after a solid 10 years of a lot of activity. And I was just cooking and working alongside some Maya Chorti women. I was reconnecting with myself. I think I just got a little bit lost with regard to what the most important things in life were. I lost my marriage at that point. My business partner was my husband, and I was really just feeling heartbroken and as if I needed to figure out my priorities. And I did that, and I was blessed to live down there for quite a while, and then moved to Scandinavia, and as you mentioned, just traveled around the world. I started documenting people on topics such as, what do I want my legacy to be? What's really important in life? What lessons have you learned about how to have a great relationship? Just really topics that were more interesting to me at the time than, how to make a good velouté sauce.
Yes.
And so that's the path I've been on now, and I love it.
Yeah, it's amazing. What would you say some of your biggest career highlights have been?
This latest documentary of mine, it was just released on Friday as a part of Slam Dance Film Festival here in the US, though it's available globally. Documenting the women who went up against the $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline, earning the trust of these women and being entrusted to tell their incredible story over the course of 2.5 years really is the honor of my career so far, and probably will always be. I'm really blessed to do last interviews of many people. I've done a lot of final interviews, so someone is passing away and they want to give their last thoughts. That's something that means a lot to me, because I think, wow, how lucky am I to be there in those last moments when they're saying goodbye. And so I've got a lot of interviews like that I've never released that I will someday. And just seeing the world, being welcomed into everywhere. I've had in the course of 1 week where I remember getting fleas from having to go to the bathroom in a ditch. And then I was in a literal palace, just a couple of days later. And I'm really lucky to meet people of all walks of life and to see how people live. And to me, nothing is more fascinating than seeing how other people live and what matters to them.
Absolutely. And it's also the power of storytelling.
Yes, absolutely. And letting people tell their own stories in their own way. Quite often we're asked to tell stories in the traditional Caucasian narrative, which is you have this hero and a hero goes on a journey and in the end they succeed. And a lot of the indigenous people that I interview, first of all, there's not one hero. It's a communal story. Everybody counts equally, and so everyone has a say. And it doesn't always turn out the way we'd hoped. And so what are those lessons that can be learned even when the odds continue to be stacked up against a person or a group of people? I think that's a fascinating thing, and it was something I've had to go up against in my career, telling stories in a different way, honoring the way in which the people want to tell their own stories. It's not my story. I'm just there as a fly on the wall and hopefully as a conduit to open some doors for them for their stories to come forth.
Yeah, absolutely. So dictators, Holocaust survivors, athletes, murderers, rock stars, and none have entrusted you with their stories, amongst many others. This leads me to the leadership or lack of leadership. So how do you believe through your leadership style and ability to gain the trust, did you manage to connect and create these opportunities?
That is a good question. I think the leadership end of it comes before you even show up to conduct an interview or to start rolling on a film. Because as the director, producer, writer, I wear a lot of hats. my job is to make sure that the production goes smoothly and has the tone and the feel that I want it to have, which is to say, I only work with crews that are highly respectful of the communities in which we're filming. I try to brief everyone on things that are acceptable and not, with behavior, with how we show up in the first place. Everything from the people who drive the production vehicles on up to the people who are actually doing the filming. It really matters to me because we're coming into a person's life. And if I'm showing up, chances are something is really pertinent, something is urgent in the community, why I'm there, why I've been asked to come or felt compelled to come into the community. And so my leadership, it's there behind the scenes with my own crew. Once I get there, part of being a good leader is knowing when to step back, right? And so it's me just taking a back seat and allowing the people who I'm interviewing to take the lead and to guide me where they would like to go with their stories. Always knowing that they might be really nervous, that they might not have ever shared these stories before, their own families might not know the stories, and so to be there as a source of strength. Also is really important to have empathy, but to also keep your wits about you, because trust me, you could be sitting there every day just sobbing, listening to some of these stories, but how do you honor them through really listening? As someone who does a lot of interviews lately, because of my new film's release, I can tell you a lot of interviewers don't even listen. And sadly, that's really the case with a lot of crews who go into a community that they don't know, that they've not done any research on, and that they really don't intend to ever go back. And again, it comes down to respect and how do you want to treat people.
Yes, and also giving them a voice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, they've been silenced for so many years, and how can we get the stories out there? And these stories are universal. You don't have to grow up on an Indian reservation in order to understand pain, sorrow, sickness, things like that. These are human stories, and we all really do have similar stories if you really take every story down into its most basic element.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you believe you have done differently to sustain such a long career? And can you give us any examples?
I don't give up easily, which is good and bad. Sometimes you need to know when to walk away, when something's just not working. I think that's something in my youth. I would force things and push them through. And now I really step back. If I'm feeling any sort of resistance, I question why, and I wait until that resistance clears, or I change positions and find a different way. And sometimes it's an all new project. So you have to be I don't want to say thick-skinned. It's not really the appropriate term, but you have to be strong-willed. You have to believe in what you're doing. And when you're telling stories like I do, you get death threats. You get a lot of really nasty comments, get a lot of trolls. And so you have to be resilient. And luckily, I interview so many people who are incredibly resilient and are going through so much more in dealing with so many more obstacles that they're a great example, and I keep going for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So your first feature documentary, 2012, The Beginning, is the most watched of more than 1,600 programs, which is a massive achievement. So can you share more about the documentary, and did this open other career opportunities?
Yes, my first project was called 2012 The Beginning, and it was about the so-called end of the world, the end of the Maya long count calendar. I kept seeing these documentaries out there saying that Nostradamus or other people had predicted the end of the world, and that the Maya people believed the world was ending on December 21st, 2012. And because I was living there at the time, I knew that that was not how people felt, but I didn't know where this myth came from, and so I set out to explore that. I really had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to make a documentary. I really had no money at that point in my career, and luckily found two incredible partners over in Finland. who gave me a break. And I'm still partners with one of them and dear friends with the other. Sophia Ehrenruth is my partner in Helsinki, who really has stuck with my career. And she is so dedicated to telling stories that don't get told. And so we've been on this journey of End of the Line, the Women of Standing Rock together now. And it's really interesting that I have more support in Finland than I do in the United States to tell this story, because I think that the story that we're telling is really one that's shameful and that the US doesn't necessarily want to admit. And so 2012, the beginning, opened that up. And I've been really lucky to continue to be entrusted by these amazing Indigenous groups who have wisdom. They've not forgotten the things that we've forgotten in general in mainstream westernized society. And so I'm hoping that I can have many more years of telling these important stories.
For sure. And also, I'm saying you get support more outside the US. It's always the places that you least expect, I think.
Yes, really. I mean, who would have ever thought that Finland would be the ones really to come forward? We had the Finnish Film Foundation and Yle, their national broadcaster, and my co-producers, Solar Films, Play Art Productions, these companies coming forward from Helsinki to help tell the story of the Lakota. And meanwhile, I couldn't get anyone in the US to really back it. So End of the Line was actually crowdfunded, more than 1,700 donors from more than 40 countries, and then some large grant organizations who got on board. Like I said, we just had more support outside of the country than in. And that's part of what you have to do, I think, as an entrepreneur, is to just try every outlet you can until you get some success.
Absolutely. When documenting these various personal stories, how do you decide on the individuals whose stories you are telling, and how do you gain the trust of the more sensitive subjects and individuals?
It's really easy to tell who the ones are who are holding the stories. I guess it's intuition. A lot of it is intuition. Sometimes I'm being told by the community that I need to speak to a certain person, or a certain person is the spokesperson for a tribe, for instance. But I feel like the stories always choose me rather than me choosing the stories. And the same goes for the characters. They just come. It often happens, or it always happens actually, that you pick one or two people and they open the door to the next person and the next. They don't even necessarily know one another, but they know where I'm supposed to go. And you just have to trust that. And sometimes you spend an incredible amount of time and energy with someone, but in the end, their story isn't going to fit in a particular documentary. And so you end up waiting until you can use that footage for something else. I had that because I had hundreds of hours of footage for End of the Line, the Women of Standing Rock. I've got these incredible stories that I could actually make an entire series out of, with women who didn't make it into the final film. It doesn't mean that their story's not equally compelling, but it just means that, hey, you're only given 80 some minutes to tell a story, and you have to make sure that that story is always moving. And therefore, certain people's stories work for that and certain don't. In terms of gaining the trust, you really do have to earn it. I wish that that's something that documentary filmmakers would take much more seriously, not to just show up in a community with a camera and start rolling, taking pictures of kids and elders without permission, filming sacred ceremonies. I see that all the time. It's about being respectful before you even show up. Yes. And earning the trust, but then continuing to re-earn that trust. And that's a long process that goes on for years. I'm still in contact with the people that I interviewed back in 2010 and 11 for 2012, the beginning. I don't forget that that's their life. They've brought us into their homes, their sacred ceremonies.
And the culture.
That's right. And so I think that's a big honor. And how can I continue to honor that? Well, a big part of that is not that once you turn off the lights and the cameras that you don't just disappear. And you also have to respect that when you're telling a very painful story, for instance, that it's going to open up a lot of emotion for the people. We had a screening with the women from Standing Rock this week, and it was really something because they hadn't seen it before. They didn't want to see it until just before it came out, and we could all watch it together. And because of COVID, we couldn't. So we did it remotely, and I knew it was going to be so difficult for them to relive the abuses they endured. And so how can you be supportive? That's something really important that filmmakers should consider more, in my opinion.
For sure. So, having won an Emmy, would you say that this opened the door to other career opportunities? And what was that moment like for you?
Winning an Emmy is awesome, but, and it does open doors, of course. But in this industry, I live here in the Hollywood Hills and work in Hollywood, and you're only as good as your last project. And you can go
have a very short memory.
Absolutely. So you can go from something to nothing overnight, but hopefully it goes the other way as well, that you can become successful out of the blue as well. Though there's really no one who's an overnight success, truly. We just don't see the rest of their journey. This is a thankless industry, and it takes a lot to become successful. Takes a little bit of luck as well, but you're just constantly having to prove yourself. Already, even though my film just came out at the first festival on Friday, people are like, well, what are you doing now? What's coming out now? And it's like, okay, that's old news now. Now what?
Yeah. So that leads me to publicity has obviously been a big part of your career. So can you share with us more about this? And did this also help open doors for you?
Well, I used to be awesome at PR since I started with a PR company. I used to know how to attract the attention and to maintain it, and therefore how I could shine a light on topics and peoples that were really important. Now it's different because we're in this social media age and anyone can become a quote unquote expert. And it's really changed the way that my industry operates, certainly. And so, and it's good and bad, I think, because now everyone's a critic. You don't have to have any expertise whatsoever to say that film's shit and don't see it. And people will listen because they don't necessarily know that person's really not a film critic. That person's someone, sitting on their sofa and they, for whatever reason, just don't like that film. There's a place for that, certainly, but it's not as regulated as it used to be. In addition to that, social media has changed everything. In one way, that's awesome because, as I mentioned, I was able to completely crowdfund this new film of mine. And that's great. Then we had more than 50,000 fans on Facebook organically. Not so great is that I'm still locked out of my Facebook page. I've been locked out for 9 months now because I was flagged as someone who's trying to influence the outcome of a political election, which I'm definitely not. I wish I had that power, but I was deemed that, and therefore I can't post anything. And when my colleagues who are able to post, they can't boost an ad, they can't run an ad, or boost a post rather, but no one sees it. So it used to say like this was seen by 76,000 people or 120. We had videos on Facebook that were viewed by 8 or 9 million people during the Standing Rock protests. And now I posted something on Saturday, I think it was seen by 23 people. I don't know how to navigate that. I've been working so hard to fix that situation, but I don't know how. So if anyone out there does, maybe they can help us out. But it's a strange environment now to market something. You have to be really creative, and you can just hope that if you've got a great film or a great product, whatever it is that you've done, that the people will find it.
Yeah, social media, there's got to be a real overhaul on a lot of these companies.
Absolutely. It's so sad, the restrictions, and we're always, America, the land of the free and free speech. There isn't free speech. We've had all of our women, in fact, have been locked down. We have a woman who has got a following of 20 some thousand. I think it's like 29,000 on Instagram, and her account was shut down about a week ago now, because she posted something about the previous president of the US. And yeah, it's really unfortunate. It feels like a police state to me, but don't get me started on that topic.
Yeah, you and I could talk for hours on that.
Yes, I'm sure we could.
So that leads me to the final question. What are the 3 key pieces of advice you would give to others looking to pursue a similar career? And how would you like to be remembered, or what legacy would you like to leave?
Okay, I would say to trust yourself, believe in yourself, because this industry is all about selling and selling an idea. And if you don't believe in yourself or your ability to tell a story, no one else is going to believe in you. Another would be learn how to be resilient. Gosh, I can't even count how many no's I have gotten on the making of this film. But then for every 25 no's you get, then you get a yes. And that yes might be a huge yes. And you would never know if you gave up. And then another would be, and I kind of touched on this earlier, is know when to let go. If something's not working, then it's probably for a reason, and know when to call it quits, or to at least just press pause, because there might be something wrong with the project. There might be something wrong internally with you that you're not ready, or whatever. Who knows what it is? Or it just might not be the time. I have one show
Timing
idea.
is everything.
It really is. I've got one show that I shot a pilot for back in 2016, and just now is the time when I know, okay, now it's time to get out there and start marketing this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And then in terms of my legacy, I would like to be remembered as a good ally to the people who have been otherwise forgotten by others who look like me.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank
So,
you.
if people would like to connect with you, what are the best platforms to do so?
I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook as well. I think it's facebook.com/Shannon Kring, at Shannon Kring on Instagram. And my film page is End of the Line Film on Facebook. And I'm also on Vimeo. If a person wants to do a search on Vimeo, I'm under
Are you on LinkedIn as well?
I am on LinkedIn, yes. I really need to get on there and check that. Thanks for the reminder. I think I must have had a work anniversary because I'm getting all of these notes on there. But yes, gotta log in.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, and hopefully we can have you back in the future.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.